The day was getting dark when Kendra left the hospital, heading home after a very long and exhausting shift. Little did she know what was waiting for her that evening. She never could have imagined it. She had barely driven for 10 minutes, her body aching, her mind drifting, when suddenly her eyes caught sight of a disturbing scene. A mangled train, steel twisted like torn paper. One of the carriages was thrown from the track, crumpled into a nearby embankment. Smoke billowed into the sky in thick, dark plumes, glowing orange near the base where flames licked at the wreckage. Shards of shattered glass sparkled beneath the haze like fallen stars, and the air was heavy with the smell of diesel, scorched metal, and something worse, something human. Kendra slammed on the brakes, her car jerking to a stop at the side of the road. For a moment, she couldn't move, her hands clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles white, eyes wide as the horror unfolded in slow motion before her. Then she heard a scream, high, fractured, and distant. Her heart shot into her throat. She threw open the door and ran. The cold slapped her face. The gravel bit into the soles of her shoes. As she sprinted toward the wreckage, her breath came in clouds, fast and shallow. But her feet didn't stop. This wasn't just an accident. This was carnage. And someone was alive in there. Someone was calling out as she approached the closest carriage. The full scale of the disaster hit her. Steam hissed violently from broken pipes. Sparks snapped and fell from exposed wires. Fires crackled inside the engine compartment. Somewhere nearby, metal shifted with a long, aching groan, like the train itself was crying out in pain. "Is anyone there?" she shouted, hands cupped around her mouth. "Can anyone hear me?" At first, nothing. Then movement. A weak voice answered from inside the nearest crumpled car. "Help." She climbed over a large chunk of collapsed rail, her jeans tearing against the jagged edge. Inside, it was worse. The smell of blood was unmistakable. Debris covered everything. And there, pinned beneath the mangled frame of a passenger seat, lay a young man. His marine uniform torn and soaked in crimson. His face was pale, lips quivering. "I've got you," she said, already reaching for him. "Jason," he whispered. "My friend." Another voice groaned farther down the car. Two of them. She dropped to her knees, using her elbow to clear away broken glass. The second cadet lay slumped against the wall, a gash slicing across his temple. He was barely conscious. Kendra's nursing instincts surged into action. She ripped off her hoodie and pressed it against the bleeding cadet's head, tying it tightly. Her fingers shook, but her hands moved fast-trained, focused, precise. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, though the smoke was already creeping in. "Stay awake. Just look at me." The fire was closing in. Heat kissed the back of her neck. A burst of orange flared through the open side of the carriage. Time was running out. She turned back to the first cadet, Jason. His leg was pinned beneath. Twisted steel, she wedged her body beneath the bent frame, using her shoulder to push. Her muscles burned. The weight was unforgiving. Steel sliced her palm. She cried out but didn't stop. The train groaned again, louder this time. One final shove, and the seat gave way. Jason gasped in pain as she pulled him free. She slung his arm over her shoulder and dragged him toward the shattered doorway. "Keep talking to me," she said through gritted teeth. "Stay with me." She managed to get him out and to the ground, just clear of the carriage. Then she turned back. She didn't hesitate, not even for a second. She dove back in. The second cadet's breathing was shallow but steady. She wrapped her arm around his torso and heaved him up. He was heavier, limp, his legs dragging across the debris. She grunted, pulling with everything she had. But as they neared the opening, the steel beam above her gave way. A loud, cracking snap. She looked up. A shadow dropped from above. And in that final moment, without thinking, Kendra turned and wrapped her body around the cadet's frame. She shielded him. Pain exploded through her shoulder. A sharp, brutal force tore through her arm. And then nothing. Darkness swallowed the world. Kendra awoke to silence, not the gentle kind that wrapped around you like a blanket after a long day, but the sterile, aching silence of a hospital room where machines hummed softly and the air felt clean. The light above her was far too bright, bleaching everything in an antiseptic white. Her lashes fluttered, and her vision swam, unfocused. There was a dull weight in her chest, a heaviness she couldn't quite name yet. Something was wrong, very wrong. She blinked again, her eyes adjusting slowly. The ceiling came into view. The walls, the hum of fluorescent lights, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor beside her bed. Then she heard its soft sniffles, a stifled breath. She turned her head slowly and saw her sister sitting in a chair by her bedside. Aisha. Her shoulders were trembling, hands clasped tightly round a crumpled tissue. Her face was blotchy, red-rimmed, like she'd been holding it in for hours, maybe days. The moment their eyes met, Aisha broke. The tears fell freely. "Kendra," she whispered, and her voice cracked open with emotion. Kendra tried to speak, but her throat was dry, like she'd swallowed sand. She shifted slightly in bed, wincing at the sudden flare of pain in her side. Something tugged at her ribs, bandages, wires, tape. She exhaled slowly, trying to gather the strength to ask the question forming in her mind, but her mouth was too slow. Her body felt foreign, disconnected. Then her eyes dropped, and she saw it. The left side of the blanket was flattened naturally so. No gentle rise of an elbow beneath fabric. No curve of a forearm or shape of a hand. Just emptiness. Her eyes widened. Her chest seized. She stared, blinking as if willing it to change. But it didn't. The sleeve of her hospital gown was pinned shut, a soft, pale blue knot tied where her arm should have been. Gone. Her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't feel anything, no panic, no grief, just void. Like someone had turned the volume of her soul all the way down. "Kendra," Aisha's voice quivered. They had to. They had no choice. The doctors, they said it was crushed, beyond saving. You would have died if they waited. But Kendra wasn't listening. She wasn't even hearing. The room was spinning. Now, her heart pounded in her ears. A dull ringing began somewhere deep in her skull, and the sterile walls felt like they were closing in, inch by inch. Her chest rose and fell faster, faster. She pressed back into the mattress as if trying to retreat from her own body. "No," she croaked. A nurse entered then, alerted by the monitors. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, deep breaths. "Miss Woods, you're safe. You're okay. You're in recovery." Kendra turned her head away. She didn't want comfort. She didn't want reassurance. She wanted her arm back. But more than that, she wanted to forget. Time passed without shape, minutes, hours. She didn't. No. Nurses came and went. A doctor appeared, explaining things she couldn't absorb, surgery details, blood loss, trauma, words like severe compression and miraculous survival. They praised her courage, her instinct, her sacrifice, but it all blurred together into a meaningless fog. She nodded when they asked her to. She swallowed pills when they placed them in her hand, but inside, she was drifting in the silence between who she was and what she had become. Then a different voice came, softer, familiar. "He's awake now," Aisha whispered. "The boy, one of them, he's in the room next door. He's been asking to see you." Kendra blinked slowly. "The cadet," she murmured. Aisha nodded. "Jason. He won't stop asking about you. He's barely slept." Kendra stared at the ceiling for a long time, her mind spinning through memories, smoke, screams, steel, fire. She remembered his voice, his eyes. He had lived. "They're alive?" she asked quietly, her voice nearly breaking. Aisha smiled through her tears. "Both of them. Thanks to you." Kendra turned her face to the window, where gray daylight filtered in. Something inside her shifted. A small ember beneath all the pain began to glow. She nodded once. "I want to see him." Moments later, the door creaked open, and there he was, Jason. He looked different, cleaned up, his forehead stitched, left arm in a sling, but it was unmistakably him. He hesitated at the doorway, lips parted, unsure of how to walk into the room of the woman who'd nearly died for him. Then he stepped forward. Kendra sat up slightly, adjusting her posture, wincing with the effort. She looked at him really, looked tanned in his eyes. She saw something that words could never express. Survivor's guilt, gratitude, a kind of reverence. He approached the bed and took her right hand carefully in both of his, like it was the most fragile thing in the world. "You saved my life," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You didn't even know me, but you came back, and you could have run, but you came back." Kendra stared at him, and the dam inside her broke. Tears welled, slow and silent, slipping down her cheeks, not because she was in pain, not because of the loss or the trauma or the weight of the world on her shoulders, but because they had made it, because they were standing, because her sacrifice had not been in vain. Jason didn't let go of her hand. He simply bowed his head and stood there with her in the quiet truth between them. Eventually, the nurse returned, reminding him it was time to rest. He gave a soft nod and stepped back. "Thank you," he whispered again before leaving the room. When the door closed behind him, silence returned. But this time, it felt different. Kendra stared at the ceiling again. Her eyes drifted toward the window, the edge of her sleeve still flat, still empty. The loss was still there, it always would be, but so was something else now, something heavier than pain and brighter. That night, long after the halls had dimmed and the world outside quieted to a hush, Kendra lay awake. Her bed buzzed faintly, the fur-line dripped in steady rhythm. The clock on the wall ticked slowly into the early hours of morning. She looked at her armoire where it had once been. Her breath hitched, and she whispered into the darkness, "It was worth it." She meant it. Every shard of pain, every scar, every tear, because those boys were alive. And in that truth, there was peace. Still, the silence in the hospital remained. Long, heavy, unfamiliar. Kendra didn't yet know that outside these walls, her name was being whispered across the country, that the footage of her rescue was spreading like wildfire, that the president himself had seen her face, that headlines were printing words like hero, angel, and nurse with no fear. She didn't know that donations were pouring in, letters being written, a movement beginning. She had no idea the world was watching. For now, all she knew was the quiet hum of recovery and the silence between what she had lost and all that she had saved. The world found her before she even knew it was looking. While Kendra lay in her hospital bed, swathed in gauze and silence, the story was already spreading like wildfire, unfolding on phones, televisions, radios, and coffee shop conversations across the country. It started with a single video, grainy, shaky, filmed by a teenager who had been at the crossing that night. The screen jolted with movement, but the image was unmistakable amid the smoke and fire. A lone woman crawling into the wreckage. Not a firefighter, not a first responder, just a nurse in jeans and a torn hoodie, shielding 2 young men with her body and dragging them through twisted steel with raw desperation and impossible courage. The footage went online. Then it went viral. Within hours, hashtags emerged. Hashtag Train Angel, hashtag Nurse Kindra, and the one that stuck, hashtag One Arm Angel. Strangers began sharing her story, then retelling it like folklore. A woman who gave up her arm to save 2 Marines, a nurse who didn't hesitate, who walked into fire while others ran. News anchors debated the video frame by frame. Analysts speculated on her background. Celebrities tweeted their admiration. Veterans posted salutes, holding up signs with her name. Candlelight vigils were held in military towns across the country. Her name, Kendra Woods, became a headline before she ever said a word. But Kendra, she was still in recovery, still in shock. She barely knew what day it was. Her body was fighting pain, her mind swimming through trauma. Most mornings, she sat quietly by the hospital window, watching sunlight creep across the floor tiles, lost in thought. Nurses entered softly. Her sister Aisha stayed beside her most hours, screening calls, brushing Kendra's hair, reading letters aloud until Kendra asked her gently to stop. "They don't even know me," Kendra had whispered once, turning her face to the window. "They just saw a few seconds. They saw your truth," Aisha replied. That was enough. Still, Kendra stayed quiet. She didn't want a microphone. She didn't want attention. She wanted to heal, to breathe, to understand what her life had become, now half whole, half gone, but still here somehow. But the world had decided. She was no longer just a nurse who acted on instinct. She was something else now, a symbol. One morning, just after breakfast, the knock came. Aisha answered it. A nurse handed her a cordless phone, her expression unreadable. "It's for your sister," she said. "It's steady, from D.C." Kendra looked up, puzzled. "From who?" "The White House," the nurse replied. Aisha's hand clutched the phone so tightly it shook. "The what?" but the nurse only nodded and stepped out of the room. Aisha sat down beside Kendra and placed the phone carefully in her lap, as if it were a sacred object. "It's real," she whispered. "Pick it up." Kendra hesitated for a heartbeat. The whole world went still. Then she lifted the receiver, pressed it to her ear, and said, softly, "Hello." The voice on the other end was calm, respectful, and clipped with a practiced tone. A member of the president's staff. He said the commander-in-chief had watched the footage not once, many times, that he was deeply moved, that Kendra's act of bravery had reached far beyond the rails of that train yard. It had touched something fundamental in the national soul, and he wanted to meet her personally at the White House. Kendra didn't speak. Her throat tightened. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket. "Miss Woods," the voice continued, "would you be willing to come?" She didn't know how to answer. She looked at Aisha, who was already covering her mouth in disbelief, her eyes wide, tears falling again. Kendra whispered, "Yes." 2 days later, a black SUV pulled up to the curb outside the building where she and Aisha lived. It was early morning. The air was cool and quiet, the city just beginning to stir. The car's windows were tinted, the flag decal on the license plate making Aisha gasp. They helped Kendra into the car slowly. Her steps were steady, but her body still winced with each movement. She wore a simple navy blue dress and a cream-colored scarf that Aisha had picked out. Her hair was pulled back neatly, and her one arm, her strong, steady right arm, rested gently on her lap. As the car door shut and the vehicle pulled away, Kendra watched the world blur by. Cameras flashed at the end of the street. Someone shouted her name. A little girl held up a handmade sign, "Thank you, Kendra." A boy in a scout uniform saluted her as the car passed. The silence inside the vehicle was warm, wrapped in reverence. The agent beside her didn't speak. He didn't need to. The air had shifted. She was no longer just a nurse, no longer just a patient. She was the heartbeat of something larger now, of a country that had rediscovered its awe in a single, quiet act of courage. As the White House gates came into view, Kendra took a breath. Her chest rose with quiet dignity. Though her heart was hammering like a drum, she still felt like herself, unsure, unfinished, healing. But as the car slowed and the guards opened the gates, she realized something deeper. This wasn't about feeling ready. It was about being called, and she had answered. The East Room had never felt this quiet. Golden chandeliers hung like frozen stars above rows of solemn faces, officials in polished suits, veterans in pressed uniforms, and members of the press, whispering into microphones, waiting for history to unfold. The marble floor gleamed beneath their shoes, the white and gold walls standing in majestic stillness. At the front, the presidential seal was mounted beneath a simple podium where a single figure stood, the President of the United States. He rested both hands on the edge of the podium, his voice low and deliberate as it echoed into the silence. "Today," he said, scanning the room, "we honor someone whose courage redefined sacrifice. A woman who stepped forward in a moment when most would step back. A nurse who gave more than her strength, more than her training. A woman who gave part of herself so others could live." The room held its breath. Then came the sound, soft at first, a door opening. A few heads turned, and there she was, Kendra Woods. She stepped into the room slowly, carefully. She wore a tailored black suit, simple yet dignified. Her single arm rested at her side, the sleeve on the other side empty, but not hidden, folded neatly and pinned with quiet pride. Her chin was raised, her posture strong. Every step she took echoed through the room like a heartbeat. No one spoke. No one blinked. The entire room rose, even the Marines. In the front row sat two young men in full dress uniform, Jason and Eli, the cadets she had rescued. Their faces were solemn, eyes locked on her, chests rising with a quiet pride they couldn't contain. They didn't move. They just watched her the way you'd watch a lighthouse in the middle of a storm. And Kendra, ever composed, ever graceful, nodded to them once. Then she faced the president. He stepped down from the podium as she approached. His face, usually a mask of polished confidence, softened. His eyes held something quiet, something personal. He didn't look at her as a headline, not even as a hero. He looked at her like a man meeting someone who reminded him why hope still lived in this "Country, Kendra Woods," he said, his voice calm but full, "on behalf of a grateful nation. It is my honor to present you with the Medal of Honor, the highest military distinction ever awarded to a civilian." There was a pause. Then a woman in uniform stepped forward, holding a velvet box. The president took it gently and opened it, revealing the medal's weighty gold, its ribbon shimmering blue. He leaned forward, and with a tenderness not captured by cameras, he placed the medal around Kendra's neck. It lay softly across her chest, catching the light but not overpowering her presence. It was not the medal that made the room gasp, it was the way she stood. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She simply closed her eyes for one moment, just one, and let the weight of it settle. When she opened them again, she looked not at the press, not at the ceiling, not at the nation watching. She looked inward and smiled. It wasn't a smile for attention. It wasn't for the cameras or the crowd or even the president. It was for the patient she'd sat beside in silence, for the elderly man she'd sung to when he couldn't sleep, for the young mother she'd comforted as she lost her child, for the hospital nights spent holding pain in one hand and paperwork in the other. It was for every quiet moment of care no one ever saw. Because Kendra had never lived for applause, she had lived for people. The president turned to the room. "This medal honors her sacrifice," he said. "But our thanks must go further." There was a murmur of curiosity. Kendra blinked. "Today," he continued, through a coordinated gesture between this administration, private donors, and citizens who contributed in the millions, "we are giving Kendra something more." He stepped aside as an aide approached with a sealed envelope and a small silver key. In this envelope is confirmation of a grant totaling $20 million, not in payment, not in charity, but in recognition, in trust. It is yours, Miss Woods, to rebuild, to rest, or to reshape the world, however you choose. There was a hush across the room, a breath held by a nation. The president nodded to another official nearby, who stepped forward with a photo. "And this," he said, holding the framed image toward her, "is your new home, a custom-built lakefront residence in Virginia. Accessible, peaceful, private, a place to rest, to dream, to heal." Aisha, seated in the second row, covered her mouth. Her tears returned. Kendra's lips parted slightly, the first hint of disbelief touching her features. And finally, the president added, "We understand that the road forward isn't always easy. So, along with your home, we present to you a brand new vehicle, specially modified for your needs, to give you the freedom you so selflessly gave others." He handed her the silver key. Kendra didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat tightened as the moment pressed down on her. All she could do was whisper, "Thank you." It was small, quiet, but the moment she said it, the room erupted, not in polite applause, but in thunder. Claps and cheers echoed from every corner of the East Room. Marines stood and saluted. Nurses dabbed at their eyes. Members of Congress rose to their feet, not in ceremony, but in awe. The president stepped back, allowing the moment to belong to her entirely. She stood at the center of it all, one arm gone, yes, but not diminished. In that room, Kendra Woods didn't look like a survivor. She looked like the embodiment of compassion, of resilience, of everything good the world still had to offer. The applause swelled again, echoing through the White House, then into homes across the country. People stood from their couches. Strangers clapped in airports. Grandparents in nursing homes whispered her name, not because she asked for any of it, but because in one irreversible act, she had shown what courage truly was. Kendra stepped back. From the podium, the medal resting on her chest like a quiet crown. She gave a final nod to the room, then met the eyes of the cadets once more. Jason's jaw trembled. Eli had tears in his eyes. Kendra didn't say anything she didn't need to. In the silence between them, there lived 1,000 words. The house was still. Birdsong floated through open windows, and the gentle whisper of lake water brushing against the shore became the new rhythm of her mornings. It was peaceful, serene, the sort of place people dream of, retiring to, a single-story bungalow with sun-warmed wooden floors, a wide front porch, and a small swing that creaked just a little in the wind. It overlooked a wide, silver lake that mirrored the sky like glass. Kendra Woods sat at the edge of her new bed, sunlight spilling across her lap, But her mind drifted elsewhere. The house was perfect. The modified car in the driveway gleamed like something from a catalog, sleek, custom-built to meet her needs. The bank account was more than full. The grant untouched except for a few modest upgrades to make life easier. Her fridge was stocked, her bills prepaid, and her name was whispered across the country with reverence. But even in this sanctuary of safety and stillness, Kendra woke up most mornings reaching for something that was no longer there. Her left arm. She didn't mourn it in the traditional sense anymore, not the limb itself, but the rhythm it once gave her, the way she used to brush back a strand of hair mid-charting, or tie her shoes, or cradle a crying child in the air with two steady hands. Those instincts hadn't disappeared, but their outlet had, and she missed something else. Too, not the spotlight, not the applause. That part had always felt distant, like it was happening to someone else entirely. She missed the work. She missed people. She missed the tired nurse jokes in the break room, the smell of coffee too strong at 3 o'clock a.m., the quiet thank yous from patients who had no words left. She missed being needed, not because she had done something heroic once, but because she could do something small 100 times. And so her days were quiet. She tried reading, gardening, rearranging the furniture. She walked along the shore sometimes, watching the herons lift off into the air with slow grace. She meditated. She learned how to do things one-handed. But still, there were gaps in conversation, gaps in purpose. Then one morning, as the sun cast golden streaks across her porch, her phone buzzed. A message from Jason. "Hey, Miss Woods, we're in town. Eli and I would love to grab coffee if you're free. No press, just us." She stared at the screen for a long time, a slow warmth spreading through her chest. She didn't reply immediately. Her fingers hovered, unsure. Then, finally, she typed, "Kendra, one condition. You're buying." The cafe was tucked into a quiet corner of town. No flashing signs, no waiting paparazzi. Just a bell that jingled softly when the door opened. Kendra wore a loose sweater over jeans, and her hair in a simple braid. No metal, no headlines. Just her. She spotted them instantly, Jason and Eli, sitting near the back window with 2 steaming mugs already waiting on the table. They both stood when they saw her. She was struck by how much they'd changed. There was still youth in their eyes, but now it was tempered by gratitude, by experience, by something heavier they carried quietly. They smiled wide and real. Jason stepped forward first. "You look good," he said. Kendra shrugged. "Must be the lake air." Eli chuckled and motioned to the seat across from him. "Sit. We've got catching up to do." And so they talked, not about medals or politics or any of the noise that had followed them in the months after the crash. They talked about movies, about awkward dates, about their training, and how Jason still forgot to iron his uniform, about how Eli had adopted a rescue dog named Murphy who hated mailmen but loved peanut butter. They laughed until the coffee went cold. At one point, mid-laugh, Jason suddenly went quiet. His shoulders softened, and he looked down into his cup. "I think about that night all the time," he said softly. "I think about what would have happened if you didn't stop." Kendra looked at him, her expression calm but steady. He glanced up, eyes glassy. "You changed everything." There was a beat of silence, not awkward, just full. "I know," she said finally, her voice low. "But so did you. You lived, and you didn't give up." He smiled, barely. "Still feels like I owe you my whole life. You already gave me something back," she said. He blinked. "What?" Kendra leaned back, letting the late morning light pour across the table. A reason to keep going. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. They just sat there, 3 people bound not by fate, but by fire, and allowed themselves to breathe together without needing anything more. That night, back at home, Kendra stepped out onto the porch with a soft blanket around her shoulders. The lake shimmered under the stars. A cricket chirped nearby. The swing swayed slightly in the breeze. She sat there quietly, the night folding around her like a secret. For a long time, she said nothing, just stared up at the stars. She thought about the house, the car, the money, the applause. She thought about her patients, about the hospital, about the silence that came after the headlines faded. And then she thought about Jason's words, "You changed everything." No camera had captured what that moment gave her, Because in that one sentence, she understood what no medal, no speech, no grant could ever fully explain. That even in pain, even in loss, she had gained something far greater, not fame, not fortune, but purpose. And with that word resting quietly inside her, Kendra Woods smiled into the night, not for the world, but for herself. 1 year. It had been exactly 1 year since Kendra Woods crawled through fire and steel to save to strangers. A year since the silence of a hospital room swallowed her grief, since medals, applause, headlines, and hush money tried to put her story in a frame. But real healing doesn't follow a broadcast schedule. And Kendra never wanted to be frozen in that moment of loss. She wanted to move. She wanted to build. So she did. The newly constructed building stood on the edge of town, modest in design, but rich in purpose. Wide automatic doors, open corridors, natural light flooding the halls, and quiet rooms filled with tools of healing, not just for the body, but for the mind. There was a single plaque by the entrance, the Kendra Woods Rehabilitation Center. Founded in service, run with strength. Inside, Kendra walked down the hallway with measured confidence. A fitted white blouse, dark slacks, the sleeve on her left side neatly folded and pinned in place, not hidden, not displayed, just present, part of her story, part of her silhouette. And she walked without apology. Patients turned as she passed, some in wheelchairs, others practicing with crutches or prosthetics. A few nodded, their eyes widening with recognition, but most just smiled, already familiar with her quiet presence. She belonged here, not on stages, not on magazine covers. Here, this was where the real work lived. Her team was as varied as the lives they served: former medics, veterans with artificial limbs, amputee therapists who knew the terrain of trauma like the back of their hand, nurses who had burned out and found their fire again under her leadership. Every morning began with a briefing around the conference table. No egos, no bureaucracy, just mission. Kendra led the meetings herself, always standing, always listening. Today, we've got a new group coming in, she said one morning. 6 patients from the VA transfer program. I want a staff rotating per person. Everyone should feel seen. When she spoke, people listened, not because her voice was loud, but because her conviction was quiet and absolute. There were no speeches about heroism, no framed photos of her receiving the Medal of Honor on the walls. The only photo she kept in her office was a candid snapshot of Jason and Eli, the 2 cadets she had rescued, laughing with her outside a cafe. That was what mattered, not what she survived, but who she helped survive after her. Each day was its own test of endurance. Kendra taught physical therapy drills. She coached new amputees through their first moments of walking, of dressing themselves again, of facing the mirror. She mentored nurses who had lost their way, helping them reconnect with their why. No judgment, only compassion. She wasn't interested in being admired, she was here to make a difference. The pain never fully left her. There were days the scar ached, days she still woke up reaching instinctively for the arm that wasn't there. But those days didn't stop her. If anything, they reminded her she was still living. One afternoon, a new recruit, a young woman barely into her 20s, approached her at the end of a class. Her scrubs were too large, her eyes filled with hesitation. She'd struggled through the CPR module, her hands shaking during practice. Kendra had noticed, but said nothing then. Now the girl stood in front of her, searching for something more than technique. Miss Woods, she asked softly, can I ask you something? Kendra looked up from the charts in her hand. Of course, the girl swallowed. How did you keep going after everything, after losing so much? There it was, the question most people avoided asking out loud. Kendra let the silence sit for a moment, then she smiled, gently, fully. Because pain, she said, is proof I survived. And if I survived, I have work to do. The girl's eyes shimmered. She nodded slowly, and something in her shoulders relaxed. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a TED talk. It was one sentence, and it changed her. Later that evening, long after the hallways had quieted and the sun slipped behind the trees outside, Kendra stood alone in her office. The window overlooked the center's main garden, where a few patients were walking slow but steady toward the gazebo at the end of the path. She watched them with a quiet satisfaction. She had given up a part of herself on those tracks, But what she had built from that moment, this center, this team, this purpose had grown into something far bigger. She turned off the light, gathered her things, and walked out with the ease of someone who knew exactly who she was, a nurse, a hero. But more than that, a woman who had risen not because the world needed her, but because she refused to stay. Down as the scene fades and her silhouette passes into the soft gold of the setting sun. We don't remember Kendra for what she lost. We remember her for how she rose, a symbol of quiet, unstoppable grace. If you enjoyed the story of Kendra Woods, Jason, Eli, and the journey from tragedy to triumph, please like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful storytelling. Let us know in the comments what you felt about how the story unfolded and how it all ended. What moment touched you most? Rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. And don't forget to drop the location of where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you.